This time on Hockey Seasons, the 68th edition of the Montreal Canadiens, the 1976-77 team that won Montreal's 20th Stanley Cup, sweeping the Boston Bruins in 4 games. Let's talk about the season. The Canadiens set an NHL record for the most points in a season by a team with 132. That record still stands today. They outscored their opponents by a whopping 216 goals over 80 games. That's an average of 2.7 goals per game more than their opponents. Incredible stat right there. October started with a bang for Montreal, going 9-3-1, including 2 shutouts for the month. Guy Lafleur led the team in scoring with 11 goals and 10 assists, with 3 2-goal games. They broke out in November, going 10-1-2, including 2 8-goal nights, a 9-goal night, and even an 11-goal night. Wow, what a month for Montreal. Steve Shutt broke out this month with 16 goals and 7 assists. Lafleur chipped in for 23 points as well. December brought an 8-1-3 record with 3 shutouts. Lafleur kept up his torrid pace with 15 points, while Shutt had his lowest month total with only 8 points. January saw Montreal win 10 games with only 2 road losses and 2 ties. Shutt came back with 10 goals and 8 assists for the month, with Lafleur adding 16 points. In February, Montreal did not lose a game all month, going 10-0-2 with 1 shutout. Lafleur had a breakup month with 27 points, including a hat-trick on the 23rd and a 4-point night on February 1st. Shutt continued his scoring with 17 points for the month. Ending the season in March and April, Montreal went 13-1-2 with 4 shutouts, including back-to-back shutouts against Detroit on March 26th and 27th. Lafleur continued his push with 34 points in March and April, with 3 4-point nights. Steve Shutt added 11 goals and 16 points to his total. Over the 80-game season, Montreal won 60 games with 8 losses and 12 ties for a whopping 132 points. 20 points clear of their nearest rival, the Philadelphia Flyers, and 49 points ahead in the Norris Division. Steve Shutt led the team with 60 goals, a new Montreal team high, followed by Guy Lafleur with 56. But Lafleur tacked on 80 assists to lead Montreal and the league with 136 points, the highest point season of his career. Shutt had a great season with 105 points, but never quite got close to 60 goals again in his career, and this was his only 100-point season. Larry Robinson was third on the team with 19 goals, 66 assists for 85 points. He also led the team in plus-minus with a whopping 120. That was 31 clear of the next highest on Montreal. Doug Risebrough led the team with 132 penalty minutes. In nets, Ken Dryden and Michel Larocque were number 1 and number 2 in the NHL in goalie stats with a 2.14 and 2.09 goals against average respectively, with a combined 14 shutouts between them. In the 1976-77 season, the Canadiens swept the following teams: Cleveland Barons, New York Islanders, Philadelphia Flyers, Vancouver Canucks, and Washington Capitals for a combined 23-0-0 record against those teams. They did have a losing record against their rivals, the Boston Bruins, going 2-3, and they also split with the Buffalo Sabres 2-2-1. In the playoffs, the Canadiens swept the St. Louis Blues in 4 games, outscoring them 19-3 with 1 shutout. Lafleur led the team with 5 goals and 12 points in the 4 games. Next up was the New York Islanders. Canadiens took the first 2 games, with the Islanders winning Game 3. Montreal gained their 2-game lead with a win in Game 4, but the Islanders took Game 5, inching ever so closer back in the series. But Montreal closed the door in Game 6 with a 2-1 win, wrapping up the series. Dryden had 2 shutouts over the 6 games. Steve Shutt and Guy Lafleur each potted 6 points in the series. Next up was their rival, the Boston Bruins, for the Cup. The series did not turn out as competitive as hoped, with Montreal sweeping the series in 4 games. and outscoring them 16-6 with one shutout. Lafleur led the team with 9 points in this short series. The Habs outscored their opponents 54-23 in the playoffs. Ken Dryden was in nets for all 14 games in the playoffs with a stunning 1.55 goals against average with 4 shutouts. How about some stories for this season? On awards night, Guy Lafleur swept the Hart Trophy for regular season MVP, the Art Ross for scoring champion, and he took home the Conn Smythe for playoff MVP. Ken Dryden and Michel Leroux took the Vezina Trophy with a combined 2.12 goals against average. Larry Robinson won the Norris Trophy for the best defenseman, and Scotty Bowman won the Adams Trophy for Coach of the Year. Quite the night for Montreal at the end of the year banquet. Montreal's plus 216 goal differential was the highest in league history. They had 2 8-game win streaks and 2 5-game win streaks this season. Scotty Bowman, coach of Montreal, captured his 3rd Stanley Cup. The first team NHL All-Star team featured 2/3 of Montreal's starting lineup. Lafleur and Shutt as wingers, Robinson as a defenseman, with Dryden in goal. Guy Lafleur was a second-team defenseman. The low point for the season was across a 5-day span where they lost 7-2 and 7-3 to St. Louis and Boston, respectively. I'm sure Scotty was not happy at that point, and they probably had to do a little extra skating. Even though they played at 86.5% of the season tied or in the lead, they trailed at 1 point in 21 of the 60 wins and 9 of their 12 ties. So they did come back in games to get points and wins. The real scary thing about the Canadiens was how young they were. The only players on the roster who were older than 30 were Jimmy Roberts and Yvan Cournoyer, who was beginning to be plagued by back troubles that caused him to miss 20 games in the season and the entire playoffs, and basically forced into retirement a year later. Lafleur and Shutt were just 24, Robinson was 25, Gainey and Riseborough were 22, and Mario Tremblay was just 19. Montreal only had 1 loss at home all season. 1 loss. It happened on October 30th, 1976, against the Boston Bruins by a score of 4-3. That loss kick-started a 34-game home unbeaten streak, 28-0-6, an NHL record to this day. It lasted from November 1st through April 2nd. How about some significance for the 76-77 season? So it was new records in wins, 60, and points, 132 in the league. They had 9 players in the lineup who ultimately made their way to the Hockey Hall of Fame, including Guy Lafleur, Yvan Cournoyer, Ken Dryden, Bob Gainey, Guy Lapointe, Jacques Lemaire, Larry Robinson, Serge Savard, and Steve Shutt, along with Scotty Bowman as coach and GM Sam Pollock. Quite the group of Hall of Famers on that team. They had the highest point percentage in post-NHL expansion history at .825. Only 1 loss over the entire season. 1 home loss all season. It was the 20th Stanley Cup in Montreal Canadiens history, and they were the only team in NHL history to play more than 60 games in a season and lose fewer than 10. How about some quotes from this season? Coach Scotty Bowman, our offensive and defensive spread was 216 goals. Imagine that. We won a lot of games, 22 by more than 4 goals, and we had Dryden in the net. There was nothing missing. How about Pete Mahovlich? When we scrimmaged, you were playing against the best players in the world. You couldn't help but get better because we had a bunch of guys who loved to be on the ice. Guy Lafleur loved to be on the ice. Steve Shutt loved to be on the ice. Larry Robinson loved to be on the ice and going at top speed. It was fun. Ken Dryden, a little bit maybe on the lower side. I'm happy we won as often as we did and lost only 8 times, but I found myself spending increasing time thinking about what I want to do in my future. It wasn't long after that Ken retired from the NHL. The 76-77 Habs are said to be the greatest team ever assembled, and really, who could argue with that? After only losing a total of 10 games in the regular season and playoffs combined, and outscoring their opponents by 216 goals, the Habs certainly earned that title. Hockey Seasons is created by Derek Mallitz, original music by Shane Ivers. Research for this episode came from thehockeywriters.com, NHL.com, hockeyreference.com, the Hockey Hall of Fame, statmuse.com, sportsillustrated.com, icehockey.fandom.com, and lastwordonsports.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time.